Hi friends, how are you? I'm Sofia Delgaris. Today is going to be a big and detailed video tutorial. I'm going to show you how to make a rose out of flexible sugar paste. To make the rose, we will need a flat, smooth surface. I'm using a plastic board from Cell Cakes. You can use any glass, marble or metal smooth surface. I place a non-slip mat under the board. We will also need a sugar flour sponge. You can cut out the petals with cutters or with a tool. We also need a Dresden tool. I like to work with this one. I roll all the petals with plastic rolling pins. I will thin the edges of the petals with the ball tool. You can also use the rounded side of the Dresden tool or the rounded side of a finger rolling pin. I will do the texture using a silicone mold, but you don't have to do the texture because the rose will be beautiful without it. I will dry the petals on paper towel rings. I cut the towels diagonally, and from these triangles I twist rings. The rings can be made large, medium and small for different sizes of petals. These rings are not disposable. I collect them in containers and store them until next time. To keep the petals from sticking to my hand, I take a dry napkin and put cornstarch on it. Then I tie it with a rubber band and use it. You can also use coconut oil or Crisco to keep your sugar paste from sticking to your hands. Now I'm going to show a way to mold sugar flowers without cutters. To do this, I find petal templates and cut them out of colored plastic envelope. They are reusable, don't stick to the sugar paste, and are very easy to work with. The first thing I start with the molding, the base for the rose. It should be made in advance, 2 days in advance, so what the sugar paste had time to dry and the base was solid. For this I use a basic sugar paste based on gelatin. If you are interested in her recipe, write about it in the comments. But for the base of the sugar rose, you can use any sugar paste, including the leftovers after covering the cake, in any color. I break off a piece of paste. I mix it until it's elastic. If it's sticky, I use starch or Crisco. Now we are ready to mold the base for the rose. But you need to answer one main question. What size should be this base? Look, I will mold the rose using 2 sizes of petals. One petal is 5 mm larger than the other. I take the smaller petal and trace it on the paper. I draw the center axis from top to bottom and I divide into 3 parts. 2/3 will be the base of the rose. I take sugar paste, roll a ball, and then make the shape of a drop. I try it on the diagram, and I see that is too big. I pinch a piece of a paste and again form a ball and then a drop. The beauty of the surface of the drop does not matter, because later we will glue it with petals anyway. It is important to check the size, make the tip sharp. And the most important thing is that the base of the drop remains voluminous. Do not make narrow and long drops. Look at the diagram to see that a correct and incorrect drop looks like. I dried drops for 2 days. I make a lot of these drop bases. When dry, they store perfectly in a container at room temperature for many months. If you do not have time to wait, you can mold roses on soft bases, but in that case, it will be difficult to do it. After 2 days, I move on to work on the petals. For one rose, will require about 20 to 40 grams of paste. It depends on the size on the petals and also on the thickness of rolling the paste. But I take a reserve an additional 20 grams, so what it would be convenient to work. I put the rest of the paste in a bag and a container. I store them in the refrigerator. I stir the paste with pulling movements. If the paste is very sticky to your hand, you can add starch. I color with food coloring in delicate pastel colors. Do not dye the paste in bright colors. We need to leave area to give visual volume to the sugar colors with flower dust or airbrush. Molding the bud and the first row of petals. After coloring the paste, I separate on third, about 20 grams, and roll it out on a board. Don't roll it out too thin, otherwise it will be difficult to work with. I take a small cutter or template and cut out 4 small petals. I put the rest on the paste in a bag and transfer the petals on the sponge. I thin the edges of the petals with the ball tool. I do it with the convex part of the tool, strictly along the edges of the petal. You can use a Dresden tool, it's rounded and convex side, or another rounded tool. Making texture to the rose petals is not necessary, but I have a silicone double-sided mold, so I will use it. I sprinkle the mold with starch. I put a petal in the middle and press it down. I take the petal out. Look how beautiful it is. I see a ragged edge. I don't like it. So while I have a chance, I'm going to remove it with my fingers. You can do it while the sugar paste is soft, or you can cut off the rough edge with scissors. I prepared the first small 4 petals, 1 piece for the bud and 3 pieces for the first row. I take a number 1 synthetic brush, pastry glue and a dry base in the shape of a drop for the rose. If you are interested in how I prepare pastry glue myself at home, write and I will shoot a separate video on this topic. I greased the petals along the edge on both sides, up to half of the petal. Glue take a little, otherwise the work will be dirty and petals can fall off. I take a drop and the petal in my hands. I lean the drop to the petal not higher and not on the same level, and a centimeter and a half below the edge of the petal. Look at that, not like this. I need to tilt the petal toward the top of the drop so they are close together. Then I check the axis. The petal and the drop should be aligned. And from the top, I tilt and twist the left side of the petal onto the drop. And I close the right side of the petal. At the top, a small hole is formed about 2 millimeters. I twist Carefully glue the bud from the bottom with a tool. I check the axle. If the petal is glued crooked, I can tear it off and reglue it correctly. Everything's fine, so I start gluing the first row of sugar rose petals. If the glue on the petals is already dry, I repeat and smear them with glue. The height of the petals of the first row will be 3 mm higher relative to the bud. I check this by leaning to the top of the new petal to the top of the bud. I tilt the top of the petal on the bud. The petal hugs the bud from above. I check the axis of the bud and the petal. Tilt. Pull it on the bud on the left side, but you only need to glue the petal from the bottom. The right side of the petal remains open. It is important. Then I take the second petal and move it counterclockwise, that is, to the left. The middle of the second petal should stop where the left edge of the first petal is. All the petals in one row will be at the same level, but each row will differ from the previous one by 3 mm. Similarly, glue the third petal. I peel off the right side of the first petal and put the third petal under it. I twist the edges of the petals with a toothpick or a thin round stick. If you have done everything correctly, the petals should form an equilateral triangle when viewed from above. And all three right sides of the petals should be on the outside and nicely curled. If the petals are strongly glued to the drop, you can push them off with the rounded side of the Dresden tool. At this point we have one small petal in the bud, 3 small petals at the first row. Now we need to glue the second and third rows. In each of them will be 3 large petals. I roll out 30 grams of sugar paste. I cut out 6 large petals. I thin the edges and make a texture. The petals of the third row need to be dried on the rings in order to fix a beautiful curve. If you use large rings, the petals will fall through. I use medium-sized rings, so I take a medium ring of paper, put a petal there and press in the center. I twist the edges of the petal with a toothpick. I leave the petals of the third row for 5 to 10 minutes so that they hold their shape. I start gluing 3 petals of the second row. I smear 2/3 of the glue on the left side and 1/3 on the right side. I find any of the 3 edges of the petals of the first row and lean the center of the new petal against it. I make sure that the second row is 3 mm higher than the petals of the first row. I move counterclockwise and glue the second and third petals. I glue the left edge of the third petal under the right edge of the first petal. When quickly, while the sugar paste is still soft, I make bends in the center of the petals. Twist the edges of the petals with a toothpick. The second row is done. Look how beautiful! I smear glue on the petals of the third row. And I find a gap between two petals of the previous second row. I tilt the bud on its side and put a new petal there. It should be 3 mm higher when I squeeze the base of the petal to create an air pocket. This air pocket will make the rose more voluminous. Glue the first petal. Then I move counterclockwise. I find the two tops of the petals of the previous row and glue the second petal between them. For the third petal, I peel off the right side of the first petal and put the left side of the first petal under it. I'll twist the petals. You can stop at this point. Look how beautiful it is. But I want to make a fourth row. It will consist of 5 large petals at once. If you have time, you can dry the petals of the third row for 5 minutes on the rings to make it easier to create the shape. The fourth row should be glued 1 centimeter below the petals of the previous rows. You can measure this by placing a tassel on the tops of the rose petals. Glue all 5 petals counterclockwise and with air pockets. I twist the petals with a toothpick or my fingers. I leave the sugar rose to dry for about 3 to 5 hours. The rose from this sugar paste remains always plastic, but in order to make the coloring even and not to deform the sugar flower, I prefer to color the flowers when they are drier. I will post the recipe for this flexible sugar paste in the description below the video. To color the rose we will need a paper towel, a dry flat synthetic number 8 brush, petal dust color and cornstarch. I dilute the bright dye with cornstarch. I rub the brush on the towel. I paint the middle of the rose with the brush from top to bottom. Starting with the second row of petals, I change brush position and coloring technique. I touch the edge of the petal with the brush and drag the brush on a petal. Moving towards the center of the flower, I don't paint backwards. And again touch the edge of the petal and repeatedly repeat this movement from the edge to the center. You cannot move the brush along the edge of the petal. It is necessary to move strictly from the edge to the center. Where the petals are strongly twisted, I turn the rose so that the brush can touch the edge of the petal. You can store the finished sugar flowers in containers for many years. It is important to protect them from moisture and sun. Friends, if you have any questions or wishes, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you for your attention and invite you to watch other videos on my channel.